Garbage in, garbage out. A lot of you here now belong to two boxes. We've forgotten we have political parties. The only political parties we know is Arab Samoei and Baba. You know, those are political parties. Yeah? And we are fighting, you know, to show, you know, how those two are important to us. And we are therefore parrying the dream that we aspired for. So that indeed is why we're here, na natumai kwamba tutaweza kwa pamoja kutafakari na tutoke nje ya hii mlango, si kuulizana maswali, lakini tukiwa na jibu. This is what I'm going to do to make Kenya better, because it's my duty to make Kenya better. Thank you so much. And now it's my great honor to invite a good friend of ours, a man who has walked the journey with us towards entrenching constitutionalism, Dr. Conrad Bosire, who until early this year, actually in January 2021, was the Chief of Staff in the Kenya Judiciary and the Acting Executive Director of the National Council on the Administration of Justice, NCAJ. Before then, Daktari, as Ndugu Omondi has already told us, used to work with Yash Bargai at Katiba Institute, a premier think tank in Kenya that seeks to entrench the culture of constitutionalism, that creates knowledge, that challenges thought on what we need to do differently to live constitutions. Daktari is an alumnus of the University of Western Cape, where he studied doctorate of philosophy, and his doctoral research focused on design and effectiveness of Kenya's devolved system of government. He is currently an adjunct lecturer at the School of Law, Strathmore University. And you know Strathmore University is a platinum, is a platinum school. And so devolution, and is coming here to lead us discuss devolution. Can I request that we put our hands together to welcome Daktari? Though he's not a politician, he has worked with politicians. So, and maybe he's gonna become one and probably help us implement the ideas that he has. Karibu sana Daktari. Moja, Biri. Asante sana. Those crabs make me cry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Masese, for that introduction and for the Kanu claps. I remember them during those times, Mheshimiwa akiingia kwa kuhutubia wananchi, si ndio? Oh, thank you very much. So, I don't know if I can take this out. So, vile mmesikia, kwa majina naitwa Conrad Bosire, na vile nilijiintroduce, mimi ni wakili, na vile mmeelezwa nimefanya kazi kidogo kwa idara ya magereza. Kabla ya hapo nilikuwa Katiba Institute kwa muda wa miaka 4 hivi, na mbeleni hapo nilikuwa mwanafunzi wa sheria, na pia nilisomea kidogo mambo ya ugatuzi. So just the other day, Omondi requested me to come and we go together and discuss, go through the 11 years of implementation of the Constitution. And ukiongea na wale ambao wanaangalia devolution kidogo, devolution imekuwa implemented for how long? Huu ni mwaka wangapi wa ugatuzi? 11. 8-9 hapo, si ndio? Kwa sababu katiba ilikuja August 2010. Then we waited for how long? Until 2013, si ndio? That's when the first set of county governments came into place. So, of course, the years before 2013, kuna mambo ambayo tulifanya kutayarisha, serikali zikakuja in 2013, and then transition and on and on. So leo maybe with that background, that we have had counties for around 8-9 years, and we had some years in preparation. Ndio counties to come into place, so we can have a discussion on the journey that counties have traveled, the objectives that we had in devolution, and I really like that. I'm not the one who designed this title, it is hits and misses. So I took some minutes trying to understand what these are, and we'll go together to see, we'll work together to see what the hits and the misses are, tukiongea juu ya ugatuzi na mambo kama hayo. Nikijitayarisha kuja kufanya hii presentation, kuna maswali ambayo na wakati umepewa task, there are things which come into your head, isn't it? As you try to make presentation, prepare what to discuss, and all that. And the first thing Mondi aliuliza wakati alikuwa hapa mbele yetu, ni malengo gani tulikuwa nayo wakati tulikuwa tunajadili mambo ya ugatuzi. Na kama wanaharakati wa haki za kibinadamu, ugatuzi na uongozi mwema na mambo kama hayo, I'm sure this is a question which you have interacted with in your work that you are doing. What are the motivations? What are the objectives? And all that. And if you are looking at the hits and misses of devolution, as human rights activists, as community workers, and generally people looking at the governance processes, when you talk about devolution, what are you looking at? What do we set out to us? Tulikuwa na CKRC, tukakuwa na bomas, tukakuwa na referendum, tukakuwa na committee of experts, alafu tena tukakuwa na referendum ya pili, which went through. Were we very clear? Now we are at 9 years, miaka 9 ya kutekeleza ugatuzi. And you look back in from around 1997. See, 1997 ndio mambo yalichacha sana. That is the time when Yash Palgai na wenzake, you remember the Ufungamano Initiative, na pia kulikuwa na CKRC commissioners, alafu wakaungana, si ndio? That time, na ukiangalia saizi, were we very clear on what we are going to do with ugatuzi? Most of us in the room were around, isn't it? Were we very, very clear on what we were to do? Looking at the way counties are operating, the challenges they are having, and all that, did we have clear answers? Who says yes? I hear a lot of no's. Did we have clear answers with devolution? Okay. I think I also agree. We didn't know what we were inviting into our space, isn't it? We were saying devolution is good, but the details were lacking. So, when you decide now to look around, check, and hold maybe the county government of Nakuru into account on devolution, ushahidi wa utekelezaji unautafuta wapi? Swali. Ushahidi wa utekelezaji utafuta wapi? Kwa sababu lazima ujue kile ambacho unadadisi katika utawala wa county ya Nakuru, for instance, isn't it? So that is also another question you ask yourself as a human rights activist, or as a person who is involved in accountability, in governance, at whatever level. whether national or at the county, sub-county, ward, and the village level that they said is going to be operational. Alafu, we have said yes, devolution. What is devolution? And we've said it's different from how the previous local authorities operated. Mnakumbuka the manispa za kitambo. Is there a difference between the two? Or is just name? So, those are the questions. I'm just putting there the questions which came into my mind as I prepared this presentation. And I think they are very important in this process. So then, how do we assess the hits and misses regarding the implementation of devolution? So I thought maybe at this 11th anniversary of the Constitution, or the 8th or 9th year of implementation of devolution, we can have a bit of history. Tumetoka wapi mpaka sasa tuko na county na pia national level, and what journey have we traveled as as a country with regard to governance below the national level, ugatuzi, decentralization, na mambo kama hayo. So I'll not go into details. I just want to mention this in passing so that we can have the real discussion of the challenges here. Basically, local governance or subnational governance, if you can say that very broadly, started and followed the colonial rule and all that. As you understand, our formal, if you trace back from the formal rule, you know, before that, all the communities that occupy the territory called Kenya today, tulikuwa na ugatuzi yetu. They were different, and colonialism and British administration brought together that space that we call Kenya. 1895, you know the history and all that, and how the current territory came to be what we call Kenya today. And I just pinpointed some of the historical bits ambazo ni historia, tunaweza kusema kwamba ni historia ya ugatuzi. Mnaelewa ile railway ambayo inatoka Mombasa inaenda mpaka Yes, you are right. Mwingine alikuwa amesema Kisumu. Hiyo Kisumu ni ya SGR. ile ya mzungu ilikuwa inatoka Kenya inaenda Uganda, si ndio? So, what happened is that Mombasa and Nairobi became townships for supply of materials and all that. So, they were townships. And as the towns developed, tunajua, we were told the Indians came and they needed places to stay, they needed water, there was power, railway station, administration, the DCs, wazungu ambao walikuwa ni utawala. So Mombasa and Nairobi became informal townships, but in 1903, there was the Townships Ordinance Act, ordinance that was passed, and which regulated how Mombasa and Nairobi were to be run. And then in 1905, you know Lord Dalamere, isn't it? And wale wazungu settlers who said there is no taxation without, you remember that? It's taxation without representation. And here they formed informal associations and committees in the European settled areas. As you know, outside of Nairobi and urban areas, there are areas where you could not be found roaming around, isn't it? They were carved out for European settlement. They did European farming there. And if you are an African and you're inside there, you are either working in the house or working in the fields of the white settlers. So what happened is they formed district advisory committees in 1919. They were formally established. And then in 1920, in those European areas, they were charged with maintenance of access roads in settled areas. So All over Kenya, where the Europeans settled, there were district advisory committees which were formed. And the first task that was given to those committees was just roads, access roads. Zile njia ambazo zilikuwa wanapitisha pali wanakaa na pia kutoa mazao na mambo kama hayo. That was the first function that was given to the committees way back before even colonialism took root. And then in 1926, a South African judge, it's called Justice Fitham, was called. Naye akakuja akafanya study ile kama commission, akarecommend waendelee na hiyo doctrine racially segregated system, which was already in practice anyway. And then the first formal rules for councils, as we understand them, came in 1928 with the district council's ordinance, and persons were elected into these councils in Mombasa and Nairobi, and by that time representation was just white. There was no Africans in these councils except in Nairobi, where there was one. So in Kisumu, where there was one, you know, the Indians had also settled and they elected one Asian into that council. Otherwise, they were all white councils. And it was not until 1950s, as the decade towards independence, and you remember the constitutions which they adopted, isn't it? The Lennox Boyd, the Lytton, and kuna katiba ambazo walipitisha ambazo zilikubali watu the black Africans to join this governance council. So it was up to until 1950s when we started joining these councils. And then in 1952, just keep in mind that that is still independence ilikuwa 1963. So as we were approaching, there were some laws and developments, but still the settled areas for Europeans were still settled areas for Europeans. And we'll come to what happened to African native reserves, where the African controlled and stayed. So here, remember we said in 1928 there were district councils ordinance, isn't it? And this, so if you went into Eldoret, Wazungu huko walikuwa na district. In Kitale there was one, huko Kienda Western, the whole of Rift Valley, and Central Province, where there was white settlement outside of the urban areas. Each had a district council. And then they realized that townships were coming up. And these townships, you know, need different kind of provision of services. Kila ambacho najaribu kueleza ni hiki leo, wacha nijaribu kuelezea. Nani ametoka Uasin Gishu? Uasin Gishu. Ama mnakumbuka Wareng County Council? Wareng, mlisikia hiyo jina? Ama tuseme Gusii County Council? Yes, even Nakuru County Council. So, but Nakuru was a municipality back then. I want a good example. So you find that tuchukue Kisii. So you have Keroka, isn't it? Back then it was an upcoming township. If actually you go into some of those areas, kulikuwa na nyumba za wazungu, sindio? Na unapata sasa county council was taking care of a very large area. And then you have small towns coming up, yeah? There's Keroka, there's Ogembo, there's what? And the entire county council is not able to take care. You have to differentiate the governance, isn't it? That is why we have provided for the urban areas separately from rural areas. It's because the dynamics of governance of an urban area and a rural area are different, isn't it? Like, let's take an example in northern, the northeastern. If you want to provide water, and there are communities that move around with pasture, will you provide boreholes and water pans, or will you provide piped water? Piped water is appropriate for an estate in Nakuru, isn't it? The other side, because of the movement and also the the diversity of they are vast areas, isn't it? So, you know, there's a different dynamics in rural and urban. So they created townships and urban councils to take care of the small areas that were coming up at that time. And in the position until some time after independence, when the apartheid local government in Kenya was abolished and we formed an all-encompassing. So what happened in African areas all this time? African areas, the African native reserves, where Africans were controlled the movement and all that. So in basically, what happened is in 1912, it was basically Mzungu akuje aone those who are collaborating with them, isn't it? They appoint you as chief. But then later, after World War I, when the Africans who went to fight came back and enlightened and knew about formal governance, they asked for representation. So in 1924, they formed the local native councils. So actually some of the leaders who came to be independence leaders, like Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, they served in these local native councils which were formed in 1924 and also expanded now to offer services like roads, I've mentioned here. So in 1937, there were further amendments to the 1912 ordinance. And if you look at the functions which were given in the 1937 ordinance, and you look at part 2 of the 4th schedule to the Constitution, you can trace where this schedule comes from, isn't it? Back from the colonial days. So you have health, education, land use, establishment and regulation of markets, regulation and maintenance of food, water supplies, and agriculture and livestock and such things. So the formal beginnings for that on the African part was in 1937 with the amendment of the 1912 native the Native Authority Ordinance. So very, very briefly, that is the history. And then in 1950, these local native councils became so, they were expanded. They did a lot of work. They established schools, they dug boreholes, they helped with the agriculture, and when the ban on growing of cash crops in the African areas was lifted after the 1952 emergency, they also helped in enhancing agriculture in African areas and all that. And after the land consolidation exercise, the schools, they expanded. They actually employed and paid for teachers in schools and all that. So it became professional local government bodies. And the 1950 African District Councils ordinance actually remained the law until tulipofika wakati wa uhuru. Below the African District Councils, remember we said there were townships and everything in the European councils. In the African areas, we also had some big African district councils and created locational councils, not in all African district councils, some. And then they were recognized because also, as we said, townships continued to grow and grow and grow. So, at independence, what happened? The first thing, of course, was the councils in the European areas and the townships and the urban councils, and then the African district councils in the African native reserves were combined. And the model that was taken was that which was in the white areas, which is to establish, karibu sana mheshimiwa, we recognize you as you get in. Yes. Then we had the district councils and in the African areas and the district councils in the European settled areas were all combined. If you remember independence, how many districts do we have in Kenya? Eh? Districts. Zilikuwa ngapi? Eh? 24. Another guess? 22. 47. Eh? 32. Now, that number is very important because of the current counties. We had 40 administrative districts. And then later, Nairobi, you remember, was a special district. So later, they were changed until they became the 47 districts that became the 47 counties. I think just keep in mind that the districts at independence and the current counties have a connection, isn't it? Yeah, so, and that is important because of some of the questions which we are going to look at. So basically, what happened is, as I said, the local governments for the white areas and the local governments for the native reserves were combined. So we had 40 district councils at independence. And then we had, below the district councils, we had the municipalities, we had the townships, and we had the urban councils. That tier remained throughout independence until 2010, when we got the new constitution. If you remember well, these councils from 40 that we had at independence, and by the time we were adopting the 47 counties, how many local governments did we have? Who remembers? The local authorities. Any guess? Had just a small transformation at around independence, because at that time we had debates over Majimbo, isn't it? We had Majimbo was established, and local authorities were placed under the 8 regions, isn't it? So these local authorities were basically under that, but as you recall, the story of Majimbo was a short-lived one. They were removed in under 2 years. So I don't want to dwell on this history too much. Just to mention a few things. That the local authorities during the colonial period and the local authorities after independence had very different orientation. And this is basically because first in 1960, as we were negotiating to have the local authorities, we came up with local government regulations, which operated in 1960 during the transition period until the Local Government Act, Cap 265, which was there for the local authorities and repealed around 2012 when the County Governments Act came into place. But in 1969, a very important thing happened. In 1969, the Transfer of Local Government Functions Act was passed. And this basically what it did was to transfer functions in major sectors: education, health, roads. Those three. Just keep those three in mind. Roads, health, education. Those were transferred. And the act actually is a one-page act of Parliament in 1969, which said that the president can allocate or transfer functions from local authorities to the national government in roads, in health, and education. Does anyone recall local authorities employing teachers here? Like me, I grew up knowing it's only TSC that has ever done it since independence. I'm sure the older ones, Mheshimiwa, with the exception of Mheshimiwa. So basically what used to happen, if you needed a dispensary, if you needed a school, and if you needed a road tarmacked, you went to your councillor. And the councillors had sectoral committees where they put those plans and they expressed the intentions and all that. And then the local authorities would plan and receive funds and implement. If you needed a school established, it is not the ministry that made the decision to establish a school in place X. It is the councillors who did that. Come 1969, all the functions were taken to the ministries. And therefore, what happened is that first, the councillors became irrelevant to the local communities where they were elected from. The functions they used to perform were taken away in 1969. And a function like running of schools used to generate income for the councils. The school fees is what they used to pay salaries for teachers. And this was taken away, and they remained with very few and nondescript functions: garbage collection, zoning laws, and market and abattoirs, the slaughterhouses, and the few things that you saw the Kanjos managing before 2010. Basically, that is what happens. Before, during the colonial period and the transition period, they used to perform very important functions, including employing teachers, but this changed. And the development dynamics changed in the post-independence period, because then, now the MPs were the ones who now shouldered the burden that the councils had. The MPs were closer to the Ministry of Roads, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health. The MPs are the ones who went and bargained for this and that. And if your MP happened to be the Minister of Education or Health or Roads, then you became the special people, isn't it? So basically, that is how the politics of local service provision transitioned to be nationalized at this level. And sometimes some people have argued that CDF was justified. I'm one of them who says, yes, in the context then, because MPs shouldered local service provision because of 1969. And for some reason, this is history that does not come up in the governance and development history, but a lot of injustices were done to the local authorities, and they declined and decayed, and decayed to a level that there's one scholar who described them as they were neither local nor government. They never understood what they were doing at that time, simply because they were denied resources and vital functions for service delivery. I think the CKRC bombers process, all the way Court of Committee of Experts until 2010, in a way, sought to reverse what had happened. They wanted the county governments to go back to where the local authorities were before 1969, and therefore to deliver local services and stuff like that. But by this time, we had become accustomed to the national government providing local services like dispensaries, like schools, like roads, and all that. So we had these drafts, the CKRC draft, which is sometimes referred to as the Guy draft. We had the Bomas draft. We had the Wako draft, which became the constitution bill that was voted to fail in 2005. I don't want to go into details because of time, but each of these had their provisions regarding devolution. Then the committee of experts came in that led us to the constitution that we are celebrating today. And they had some drafts. These drafts, I don't want to go into the history, but they had sometimes 3 levels. They came back to 2 levels and then maintained the 2 levels of government. Then they dropped them from 74, brought them now to 47 county governments and removed the regional level of government that was placed to be at the level of the provinces. So basically that is the history I want to give up to when we got the constitution in 2010. And keep in mind yale maswali ambayo tulijiuliza kabla tuanze kudadisi historia ya ugatuzi katika nchi ya Kenya. Ukiangalia Article 174 of the current constitution, iko na 9 objectives. And then Article 175 has the principles of devolution. And basically, and this is very important, I think it was really commendable that we were told devolution is supposed to serve 1 up to 9. Because if you check the previous constitution, it didn't go into such details. It basically went straight to provisions. But here we are told in this constitution, these are the objectives. These are the national objectives of governance, and this is what we stand by as a nation, as a state, under this constitution. And it provides some form of some form of guidance and all that. So if you try to summarize the 9 objectives under Article 174 of the Constitution, you'll basically come up with 3 main areas. One is development and service delivery. Maendeleo na pia huduma kwa watu. But it doesn't stop there. I just put the summary here, but it goes ahead and tells us more. It says that we need equitable development. Equitable development meaning that there are some areas. You remember the white areas that we mentioned and the African native reserves. If you check the development landscape of the country, we have sort of not broken that yet. The areas which are the white influence were ahead. The areas where there were African native reserves were behind in terms of development and provision of services. And we are trying to catch up with that. So we wanted to address that. Equity in access to services and development. And then here we want to protect marginalized communities. We say that there are some communities that have been at the periphery in terms of social and economic and political development in the country. How do we manage to have an inclusive system where all communities and all peoples are able to participate in governance, access services, in order to promote peace? One of the things which you are told is that the 2010 Constitution was a peacemaking document that we fought in 2007, and long-term constitutional reforms were part of making lasting peace. We'll come back to that question and see whether devolution has helped us achieve that. And then the other point is separation of powers, accountability in governance, and good governance generally, and efficient and effective governance and all that. So the 9 objectives are about maendeleo na huduma ziweze kufika kwa kila sehemu na kufikia kila Mkenya, na ule ubaguzi ambao ulikuwa katika maendeleo na huduma uweze kuondolewa. Ya pili ni kwamba lengo la pili la ugatuzi ni kwamba tukue na umoja, na pia tuweze kuwa na umoja na amani na kwa njia ya ugatuzi. Sasa hayo ndio maswali ambayo nataka tuone kama katika utekelezaji wa miaka 8 na 9 imepita tumeweza kuwa karibu na haya malengo ama tunaenda mbali. Alafu pia la tatu ni uwajibikaji. Tunaambiwa kwamba mkifanya ugatuzi kuna kuwa na uwajibikaji zaidi kuliko wakati ambao kila jambo linafanywa Nairobi na serikali kuu. So pia tutaangalia katika utekelezaji wa ugatuzi tumeweza kufanya kuwajibika zaidi na kuwa na serikali ambayo inasikiza wananchi. So those are the questions which I'm asking in this slide. Has there been better access to services? Yes or no? Not even a one yes. I want those ones who say yes. Somehow yako ni mbaya. Nani anasema yes? Nani anasema yes, there is a big change? Yes. Eh? Big change. I want the one who says there's a big change to say something. Explain. Wapi ile mic ingine? Just 1 minute, explain why there is a big change. Nieleze kwa dakika moja.
I would say that there is a slightly big change in regard to Session Paper number 10 of 1965. Devolution is trying to cure that problem of excluding other areas in terms of development. But the issue is about attitude and political goodwill. So if it is embraced clearly, we might cure the previous injustices.
How you are explaining the framework? Hiyo ilikuwa malengo.
Yeah.
Unasema kumekuwa na hiyo mabadiliko.
Kuna mabadiliko.
Ushahidi gani iko huko?
At least some counties where there were no basic services, those services are being realized.
Yeah.
In some counties, counties like Turkana, because we have been buoyed by the canyon of the railway line, the way you had stated. So to me, we just need to have a goodwill and good attitude.
But there's important changes happening. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So as we assess, we look at the evidence and all that, and that's why you hear there is yes, no, somewhat. So it all depends on the way you are looking at the changes now, and we'll discuss that a bit more before I finish. So development, how do we measure it? And you know, here now we are talking about development as a result of devolution, the counties and the way they are structured, the powers and resources they have, and all that. And another tricky one is at 2010, after adoption of devolution, and now in 2021, are we more united or more divided? Because of devolution? Or because of different things? Has devolution played a negative role or a positive role? Yes?
If you talk about the revolution.
Yeah. And national unity. So we are moved from development. We are now looking at it.
Devolution may play a very big role.
Promoting national unity.
At most, during when we go to governance issues, always there's what they call the county fiscal charge papers. When they are put in place, the community mobilizes itself through introduction by the county executive. So those that it comes in to identify the priorities are the people of different communities.
Yeah.
In a way, we realize the project concerns everybody as a team, but we don't identify communities when we speak about places like urban setups, like in Nakuru where we are.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good point. Good point. And I said it can be a yes, no, somewhat, depending on the issues which you look at. Sometimes when it comes to employment opportunities and nominations and all that, you hear different stories, isn't it? So it is this way or the other way. And then the other important question is, did corruption worsen or reduce after the introduction of counties? Worsened. Who said it? Who says it's? I like the ones who are unique. Who says it has reduced? Corruption has reduced with counties? Okay. I don't have very clear answers on this. We will discuss and hear what is your perceptions on these things. But if you say that, because you remember we said devolution was introduced ili iweze kuleta nini? What is accountability in Kiswahili? Uwazi is transparency, isn't it? Uwajibikaji is accountability, isn't it? Tulileta ugatuzi ili tuweze kuendeleza uwajibikaji katika utawala, si ndio? Kwa hivyo, jambo moja ambalo tunafaa kujiuliza kama wanaharakati ni kwamba ni kwa njia zipi ambazo ugatuzi umeleta uwajibikaji. Na hilo jambo unaweza kuangalia katika kitaifa ama uangalie katika kaunti, hata kama ni kaunti ya Nakuru, si ndio? Na kuna vipengele fulani ambavyo kama wanaharakati mnafaa kuangalia ili kuweza kupata hilo jibu. So kuna mambo fulani ambayo yametendeka katika utekelezaji wa ugatuzi katika hii miaka yote ambayo tumekuwa nayo. Na just to remind you, we had the period between August of 2010 until March 2013, isn't it? How many years are those? 2010, 2011, 2012, isn't it? Seme karibu miaka 3 ambayo tulikuwa nayo ili kujitayarisha kuweza kuweka mikakati, sheria na sera za ugatuzi, si ndio? Mnakumbuka kwamba kuna kamiti mbalimbali ambazo ziliwekwa na jopo kazi za kuweka hiyo mpangilio, si ndio? Mnakumbuka Transition Authority? And you remember the task force on devolved governance? The chairman was Mutaha Kangu, isn't it? And they had a team of many members, experts on governance who did that. We also had the CIC, ama mmeisahau? Commission the Commission on Implementation of the Constitution ya Nyachai, si ndio? So we had many bodies that were meant to implement or prepare us for implementation of the Constitution, including devolution. And these were very important questions because I've taken you through the history, what happened during colonial period and after independence until 1969. We wanted to go back to where we were, isn't it? That is why counties were given functions in the water sector, in the health sector, in the education sector. There's something there about Nairobi Metropolitan Services. We have roads, trade and development, agriculture, planning and development, and public participation. Ukiangalia part 2 of the 4th schedule, it actually says that public participation is a county function, isn't it? Mainly, of course, national government has that duty, but mainly it's the counties that are meant to do that because it's assumed that the counties are closer to people than the national government in Nairobi, isn't it? So some of the things which I've posted here, as I said, I don't have any straight and direct answers. Some counties may be doing it right, some counties may be doing it wrong, but some of the things we need to look at, inclusion and recognition of diversity. County appointments, how have they been performed? I know that there's been a lot of litigation from Nakuru County regarding the appointment of officers in the isn't it? Many counties have had issues with the nomination of women to the county assemblies, nomination of special groups to the county assemblies, and the whole process. We have had litigation. Some have had issues with the election of the speaker of the county and the deputy speaker and county officers. We have had court cases from all over the country, many counties, on appointment of chief officers in counties and all that. Those are questions which I cannot go into detail, but basically what counties are supposed to do. serikali za county zinafaa kukuwa na uadilifu wa sheria na kuona kwamba hii mambo yote kumekuwa people have an equal opportunity to serve in all these positions, and it should not be based on the dominant community and all that. Actually, a report which came out from the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, they actually said that counties which have their names named after the dominant group in the counties, Kisses for Kisses, Taita for, they are all of the, and this came from the colonial culture of naming a place after the community in that area, and then they created native reserves where they restricted movement to other areas, isn't it? So the names, they say even the symbolism represents that. So the report, it's a few years old, and the Public Service Commission also does an annual report on the diversity in the public service and all that. If you look at those, you will find, especially for the counties, and the worst violators of this, as I've said, were those whose names of counties have the ethnic symbol and all that. The thing is, we are required to reflect the diversity of that county, and I will not go into that because there's also a number of factors that go into that, so we need it. When you are looking at development, maendeleo, unataka kukagua ni vipi kaunti yako imefanya maendeleo vile inatakana katika sheria na constitution. So do we know the budgets, the annual plans of the county, the ICDP? The ICDP is what? ICDP, Integrated County Development, isn't it? And this is done after every 5 years, isn't it? Do we know what is in there? What are the targets annual and what are the targets at the end of the 5 years? So that we can hold our elected leaders, and also, very important, what we assume, the unelected people in the county offices who make decisions, which of course there is political accountability, but also these officials need to be accountable to us. That is why they are being hired at the county level. To me, we new civil servants to the way they used to send town clerks from the Ministry of Local Government to local authorities. The people who represent you are the ones who compose these bodies which hire, and therefore the officials are accountable to us. Where do we get this information in order to challenge the governance points? Kama wanaharakati nini. So when I was preparing for this, I'm sorry, I don't have the, because we rely on the controller of budget. Has anyone looked at the annual reports of the control of budget? How many? Yes, Masese. 2. Oh, 3. So, when you are trying to assess whether the county government has performed in a particular year. So like for instance, I picked 2019 and 2020 figures because that is what is available from the control of budget. The control of budget every year. Mwaka wa serikali unaisha mwaka upi? Unaisha June, si ndio? June. So from July, August, September, they issue the first quarter of performance of counties and the national government in terms of appropriating the budget. Umenielewa vile nimesema? Miaka 3. Miezi 3 baada ya mwaka wa hesabu za serikali kuanza, kuna ripoti ambayo inatoka kwa control of budget. And it is very detailed. They tell you what it is. So I knew I was coming to Nakuru and I picked what is said about the Nakuru County government and its implementation. So they tell us that only 11 counties in Kenya, 11 out of 47, have kept within the standards of personnel emoluments. Mnaelewa personnel emoluments? Salaries, allowances, pension contribution, na pesa ambazo zinaenda kwa wafanyikazi, si ndio? Tunaambiwa katika sera za serikali kwamba msimalize pesa yote kwa budget, kwa salaries. So that is why if let's say you are given 7 billion as a county, then you use 5 billion for salaries. Hiyo county inaweza fanya kazi kweli? Italipa mishahara tu, si ndio? People will, the workers and employees will have the salaries, but you'll not see any projects. So they say only 35% of the should be used for personnel emoluments, and only 11 counties have kept that. So we have there, if you check the report, the national report for 2020-2021, it has this information. They tell you only 11 out of 47 counties. And you can go into details and see what each county has done. The other thing they say is that there is underperformance in terms of collection of local revenue. And sometimes, and there are some previous reports which have mentioned that the amount of revenue that was collected by the former local authorities and now the counties, there is not much change. Yet, the Constitution has given more areas for service charges and also for levying taxes and all that. And there's two possible answers. One, there's revenue leaks. It's not going through the process. And secondly, maybe there's no capacity to collect that revenue. But why? Because we have all the capacity to do this. And the other thing which also you look at is the absorption rates. You are sent a development budget, and you are only able to use 30% of that in development. 70% is not used as at the cut-off date for the financial year. Will that county realize the development plans that they had put in place? No, isn't it? So this is where you get the information that then helps you, ambayo itakusaidia kama mwanaharakati wa mambo ya ugatuzi, ili kuweza kuona kwamba tunaweza kuwa na uwajibikaji katika utawala wa county and even at the national government. Then the other thing which they said, which is a major weakness and a major challenge for counties, we budget to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And we say that this 1, 2, 3, 4 will take this amount of money. But then when it comes to financial reports and submissions from the counties to the control of budget or to the treasury or to the annual reports that they give, maybe from the county treasuries, you realize that the expenditure items are not what was in the budget. Yeah? And these counties which have, I just picked from the report and put there, they say that Baringo, Bomet, Bungoma, Embu, Kakamega, Kilifi, Kitui, Kericho, Kwale, Laikipia, and the others there, I see Nakuru, they have this problem of diverting from what was budgeted. And you see those budgets, we develop them through public participation, isn't it? But then, wakati wa utekelezaji, unapata kwamba the expenditures are changed here and there, and they do not conform to what is in the budget or the cash flow statements that they present to the control of budget for those present. And kama wanaharakati wa mambo ya ugatuzi, lazima tukumbuke kwamba hii mambo sio, all the challenges do not spring from counties themselves. You saw governors issue press statement after press statement, isn't it? There's no money. And cash flow, the management of cash flow from the national treasury to counties is a big problem. That is why I've called this the national government sins. So we also have to keep that in mind, that for counties to operate, there needs to be seamless intergovernmental relations, including fiscal relations between the two levels of a government, and we have to keep that in mind. The other things is, if you check in the water sector, for instance, we still have bodies that provide services. The other day, Mulisikia, the ministry has increased the rates of water, isn't it? By tenfold, from 5 cents to 5 shillings, isn't it? Is it or what? But the bills that we are paying for water has been increased nationally. Yet, If you go to the fourth schedule, the second part of the fourth schedule, you'll find that provision of water services is a county function. And the governor of the water released a statement. They have sectoral committees and say that they were not consulted in these things. So that is part of what the national government is doing to negate what we have, the outcomes that are intended and all that. So we need to look at both levels and how they are contributing to effectiveness or inefficiency. I didn't want to end on a negative note. So what I've discussed is some of the misses. So we also have some hits. I've listed some and we can list more. One of the areas for me when I'm usually asked, the biggest impact of devolution is the inclusion of early childhood education in the country. It has grown phenomenally. Because before 2010, you remember these ECDs were forgotten, isn't it? It was basically nursery, lakini nursery pia hata unaweza pata mtoto amebahatisha ameingia tu wana ameenda, si ndio? We didn't take care of the early childhood. This is provided for in the fourth schedule, and counties have risen to the occasion, and some of these have given. So you can see, if we are talking about almost 3 million children across the country getting into some ECD facilities, and that is very critical and important. It was neglected before devolution, and substantial resources have been included here. You look at agriculture, there are some investments. You look at in the health sector, there are some investments. Even with this COVID, counties have contributed. The malaria incidence has gone down, and primary service health providers are counties and the dispensaries. And the maternal and child health programs have promoted, they have reduced death of infants and all that, and coverage and all the issues. So if you look at these reports, which I mentioned of the control of budget, we have the annual reports of the Council of Governors, we have the reports of the counties, the treasuries. If you check in their websites or other forums, you will find that the sectoral reports, which are usually issued by the National Treasury, have those evidence. Maybe just to end, I think I've taken a bit of time, but I'm finishing, is that we had certain intentions with the devolution. Tulikuwa na malengo fulani kwa kutekeleza ugatuzi. Na kuna changamoto. Kuna mambo ambayo hatujaweza kutekeleza vizuri, na kuna changamoto fulani ambazo ziko katika county, na hizi changamoto wakati mwingine zinatoka kwa njia ambayo mambo yanapangwa na kufanywa kutoka kwa serikali ya kitaifa huko Nairobi. Kama wanaharakati wa kisiasa, ni vizuri tuweze kuangalia hizi changamoto zinatokea wapi. Ya tuweze kujua ni njia zipi ambazo tunaweza kufanya ili hizi changamoto ziweze kutuondokea. La kumalizia, sitaki nimalizie kwa in a negative notion. The Constitution of Kenya 2010, actually Professor Yashpal Gai, who is one of my mentors, says the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was an imposition on the political class in Kenya. And that is why you will find that the ruling class are fighting it every other day, because it serves the interests of the people. And sometimes it's not perfect. Some challenges might be there. Not everything in the Constitution is perfect. Actually, they say not everything good is in the Constitution and not everything bad is outside the Constitution. So you'll find those dilemmas, and the best way is not to break the Constitution, but to identify the specific challenges and have a consultative and participatory way of addressing those challenges. And the two courts so far have told us as much. They have said there's no problem with changing the Constitution, just do it the way in which the Constitution provides, and wide public consultation, the way we saw the CKRC process to have similar things. So therefore, I would like to leave it at that. Let's keep the struggle. The document we have is good, and when we have an opportunity and a suitable time, we where there's an all-inclusive process of changing some of the challenges you have identified, we can address those. Thank you very much.
Wow. That's not good enough claps, eh? Makofi ile ya kiro sasa si ya Nyayo. Nyayo tumalizana nayo, ya? Okay, tuongoze makofi as the mic gets sanitized, eh? Yeah. Tuongoze makofi. No, tuongeze tu makofi.
Haya, hiyo. Nataka tufanye ile parliamentary. Tuko na ile kile tunajua labda tunafanyanga. Utaniangalia tu. I'm the one to show you what to do. When I say one, you don't do this one. You start with this one. Three times, yeah? You come up with three times. Sasa, kama one, you do this three times. Haya, one. Two. One. Two.
Asante sana. Asante Daktari, thank you so much. We sit here, some of us were actively involved in the process of the Constitution. I think I was actually at Pomas, not as a delegate, but as one involved in monitoring the process. And the MSFEL movement that was then led by Greco. And we did a lot of support. Kazi ya mikono, the committees and everything. And I supported the work for the committee that was focusing on devolution. And so I listened here and I learned a lot from you. Even when I thought, you know, I know. But you've not taken us all the way back to where it all started. And the echoes from colonialism to the constitution review process as we know it. Thanks a lot for that, Daktari. I am not able to summarize everything that you said, but I think everyone seated here has picked a takeaway, a carry home. Siku moja, wakati na siku ingine kuambia upige makofi ukisema ni ya parliament, I'll ask someone with that experience. Siku moja when Mheshimiwa Koigi, thanks sir for coming. We'll invite you formally. Akiwa mbunge wa Subukia, tulikuwa tunafanya CDF, monitoring of CDF. So tukaenda Kiamaina. Kiamaina, I think that school was tested. You started the school, Kiamaina Secondary, eh? It was not there. Was it? Yeah, so we had social audited a classroom constructed by CDF in that school. And so we are going around doing a launch of a needs assessment. Chiteri, you remember? So Mheshimiwa aliniambia, umekuja hapa unaongea kisungu mingi, hata hao wananchi hawachakusikia. Walimpigia makofi. So later when I went home, I asked myself, by the way, tulikuwa tunaambia wananchi nini? Why I'm saying kizungu mingi is not because here we can speak English. But what Dr. Bosire has done, though using English, is that he has demonstrated that the pursuit of the ideals of devolution have got the baggage of history. Sivyo? So some of the things we see happening today, roots zake ziko wapi? Uko ukoronini. Enzi ya ukoloni. Kwa hivyo kama tutabadilisha chochote, basi sharti tutafakari jinsi ambayo hiyo mizizi ya ukoloni, tuifanye nini? Tuichumbue, tuiondoe, tuikusanye, tuikaushe, tuichome. Kwa sababu mambo mengine yasipofanyiwa hivyo hayataweza kubadilika. We want to go for tea. Then after tea we are going to invite Mheshimiwa Koigi. We want now to have these two sessions for each other. Then we'll have a joint plenary. But as we go for tea, Daktari alisema the sins of national government. And he listed some of them. And he broke it down. But what are our own sins as citizens? Have we committed any sins as citizens that have facilitated the misses that were identified and shared with us by Daktari? Let's think about that over tea. What are our sins? Because if we don't identify those sins, then the session we'll be having, the plenary session, is not going to be very exciting. It's not going to be very useful. Because we want to leave here having assigned each other specific duties moving forward on how to defend the Constitution. Ili kwamba toke kwa katiba, tuingie kwa ukatiba. Asante sana. I now wish to welcome you for a cup of tea. Confirm it's ready. Yeah? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. But I'm sure the tea is out here. We are very many. I hope it won't take more than 20 minutes. And the way for that not to happen is to have few of us queuing, moving a bit faster. There's enough space out. There's enough space here. Take the cup as you stand so that we are back here in time for the very exciting, I know, very exciting conversation that is going to be led by Honorable Koigi, whose English name not many of you know. So, asante sana. Asante sana. So, tea is ready. Let's go for tea. The team here can go first. Mheshimu uze. Yeah, so if you are younger, you allow the older one to go. If there's anyone here with physical impediment, I request that you remain seated. I organize that chai iletwe kwako, si lazima ung'ang'ane kwenda. Asante na Mungu apariki. The national anthem was a prayer for everything, including tea. And if we don't want a tea break, you can let me know so that we continue.